Hey, you guys, Dustin. I want to talk about Lord of the Flies today. So it's part of our curriculum here in the U.S. So we all pretty much have our minds made up for or against it, and like any other good novel, it's worth rereading just to check whether our perspectives are right or not. So I've had to reread it several times because I'm a tutor. So a lot of times I have students come and they'll be reading through it. So I kind of have had to find something interesting in it, not just for them, but just so I can stand it. And I found a lot. It's an amazingly written novel. So something I want to focus on with it is the mimesis of children's perspectives. All right. So when you're reading Lord of the Flies, Golding is not just telling you the story like an omniscient narrator. He uses a limited omniscient third-person narrator to show us the misperceptions of the boys. All right, we are not seeing the island. We're seeing the perspectives, misperceptions, and even the limited vocabulary of the boys from inside their minds. We can see this in chapter 1, where Ralph and Piggy and Simon are walking along the beach, and they're in Eden still at this point. And it says that they turned to each other, laughing excitedly, talking, not listening. The air was bright. Ralph, faced by the task of translating all this into an explanation, stood on his head and fell over. When they had done laughing, Simon stroked Ralph's arm shyly, and they had to laugh again. "Come on," said Jack presently, "we're explorers." So Ralph, the feeling of the island is like, wow, this is an amazing feeling. He doesn't have the vocabulary for it. It's actually Jack who has the vocabulary for it. We're explorers. But Ralph, instead of talking about it, he does a handstand. He does a cartwheel, right? So from the very beginning, we see their misperceptions. We can see this several times throughout the book. It's a consistent theme. The idea that we as humans are the makers of our own environment through perception, and most importantly through misperception, our own psychological projection, right? I'm going to get into that a little bit more, because it's a brilliant way of characterizing, of both setting up the plot and characterizing the characters, is how he describes the island through each character's perspective. All right, so in a couple of chapters later, it's describing Jack, and he's practicing hunting. Of course, it's on huts on the beach. He should be helping, but he's going along, and it says Jack himself disturbs some birds. He shrank at this cry with a hiss of indrawn breath, and for a moment became less a hunter than a furtive thing, ape-like among the tangle of trees. Right, he's scared of the forest. Now this is very funny because he's hunting. He's trying to hunt, but that is producing the idea of his acting like prey, as if there's something terrible in the forest that's going to destroy him. That's you, Jack. And now this the kind of frightening rendition of the neutral forest. It's just there, is contrasted by later on when Simon, I won't put you through reading it, but Simon, he actually tries to get away from the boys. He's the mystic character, where some of the characters have different roles. He's kind of a shaman mystic figure, and later on even a Christ figure, who he kind of wants to get away from the boys because he likes being in the island. He likes he found this one place in a clearing that's covered with creepers, and he just goes and hides under this sheet of creepers. It's almost like a womb that he goes back to, which I'm not going to get too much into it, but Lord of the Flies, written in the mid-20th century, he is thinking of Freudian analysis of the id, ego, and superego of the parts of ourselves that are overwhelming the rational parts of ourselves, and also the idea, he doesn't get into it in an explicitly feminine way, but the idea of kind of wanting to secretly return to a womb. But we see that in Simon, where that's how he sees nature. Nature is a different thing for Simon than it is to Jack, because Simon and Jack are two fundamentally different characters. And that's a brilliant way of telling us this story. And it's a brilliant way of organically creating the plot, because it's not just, I mean, of course there's things from outside, all right? There's the bomber, the plane pilot, he gets blown out and he falls to the island. There's of course, the fire gets out of hand at the very beginning, but all those things are not. It's not like an intrinsic thing that happens and then starts the story. The story starts between these characters. It's. I know I just did a very broad brush description there, but it's coming out of their misperceptions and their psychology. That's a brilliant way of organically setting up this book as a modern, meaning modern 20th century kind of secular. There's nothing spiritual about this story. It's in a post-scientistic world, all right? So not scientific, scientistic. The modern idea that you should see things only through scientific lenses, which is actually a philosophical belief. It's not a scientific perspective, ironically. But anyway, so something else that happens in this is this implication is that we see their psychologies changing in response to each other. And different characters change at different rates. Now, the stock presentation of this is that, oh, Ralph stands for democracy, Jack stands for dictatorship, because this was written in the 20th century, the century of democracy versus dictatorship. But that can sometimes blind us to what's really also going on, because Ralph isn't an image of civilization per se, or of democracy per se, because he ends up he's tempted to go towards Ralph. I don't think that Ralph is the opposite pole of Jack, right? There is one character, though, whose perception is isolated from the beginning from joining in with the other boys. And it's not Simon. His perception, we can't judge others' perceptions through his. He's on a completely different level. It even references that when just before the cartwheel, when Ralph says to Jack, "If Simon walks in the middle of us," said Ralph, "then we could talk over his head." All right. Of course, that's just a comment on Simon's height, but there's no simple comments on things like that. Simon's at a different level, either much higher or much deeper than any of the other characters. So we can't judge. So he's not the one I'm talking about. I am talking about the good friend Piggy, the opposite of Jack. The symbol of real civilization in this book is not Ralph. It is Piggy, because he is the one who brings technology. And he is the one that is punished by all the other characters. Or they rely on him for his technology, but they also make fun of him. They isolate him. Now, I'm not going to get into like an Ayn Randian, he's an atlas and they're holding all of them up. I'm not talking about that kind of an idea of him as a technological industrialist or whatever. But it is very interesting how he is the one that doesn't change. He's tempted by a couple of things, but they cut him off from participating in the games that they are playing, and that actually saves Piggy. That actually is what makes him remain human. All right? Because with all their misperceptions, of course, they bring something that they steadily move to become animals, worse than animals, because they bring a cruelty that the pigs on the island have never brought. So, of course, Golding's commentary is that, we're worse than animals. Now, we don't want to just have this be a downer. I never just teach this book per se, this is us. It's not just that men are evil. Even and by the way, it is important that he used children, which in the 1800s had been the image per se of innocence. And please let us keep it that way. But I think that was just an effect of previous hundreds of years of civilization building up to, as well as the Industrial Revolution, building up to be able to release kids from the responsibilities of life. And so it was a cultural luxury that, especially in British culture, because that's what this is about, the highest civilization in history at that time, that he is commenting on. He's like, maybe not, but the fact that it's kids, it's like, okay, none are good, nay, not one. All right, to quote another book, but except for Piggy. All right, he doesn't change, but the idea of this is not that we're all bad. It's a lot worse than that. It's that we can all be bad. All right, it is up to us. We can change, and as we are cut off from the structure of our society, we get worse and worse. All right, our morality, all these things are plastic. They are not inherent in us. That doesn't mean that there's no objective morality and stuff like that, but a lot of it is we need to maintain it. Anyway, this doesn't have to be a downer, because while we want to take seriously the rules of a book when we're reading it, all right, we want to take seriously the world he's setting up. There's actually a wonderful story that was published a few years ago about a group of boys who set out from Tonga. They got blown away in a storm, and they shipwrecked on an island. Their little craft went to an island. This is back in like the 60s, 70s, but or maybe before that. But and they survived for a while. They did not eat each other, all right, the way that this metaphorically does. So this is from an article. I'll put a link in the description. The Real Lord of the Flies: What Happened When 6 Boys Were Shipwrecked for 15 Months. It's in The Guardian in 2020 by Rutger Bregman. I just want to read a little moment, because this is, of course, really brilliantly kind of put against the cultural idea of Lord of the Flies. Like, well, of course, a bunch of boys shipwrecked. We know what book we're thinking of. So let's see, where is it? The boys had set up a small commune with food garden, hollowed out tree trunks to store rainwater, a gymnasium with curious weights, a badminton court, chicken pens, and a permanent fire, all from handiwork, an old knife blade, and much determination. While the boys in Lord of the Flies come to blows over the fire, those in this real-life version tended their flame so it never went out for more than a year. The kids agreed to work in teams of 2, drawing up a strict roster for garden, kitchen, and guard duty. Sometimes they quarreled, but whenever that happened, they solved it by imposing a timeout. Their days began and ended with song and prayer. Kolo, one of the boys, fashioned a makeshift guitar from a piece of driftwood, half a coconut shell, and 6 steel wires salvaged from the wrecked boat, an instrument Peter has kept all these years, and played it to help lift their spirits. And then it goes on to describe how they, one of them broke a leg, I believe. One broke a leg, and they were able to splint it. All right, it's actually a really, really wonderful story. I was since reading it, I've always had my students read it, just so that they're not completely downed by Lord of the Flies, and to not, I mean, not in a bad way, but in a lessen the cultural impact. Like, no, this is not the end description of us as creatures or as a people. Right? And it is significant that these boys they maintained a form of wonderful, like, not wonderful, but the better aspects of civilization. So anyway, thank you guys for joining me. All right, I do suggest rereading Lord of the Flies. It is a very well written book, and I hope these couple of things that I said today will have made it easier when you do. Okay, all right. See you the next one.